Hi, welcome to the third lecture of the series, so thanks for coming back. We're going to make a start so Robert can kind of kick everything off. But just as usual, to flag another event that might be of interest to you. So on the 19th of November, there's a health and innovation conference taking place in school. It's open to students only, but you can be a student from any university. So there'll be various speakers that will be coming to talk on the subject area, but also each delegate will have the chance to develop a health innovation idea as well, to help solve a local health problem that they might think is in the area or kind of more globally as well. So it's all on our website again, so if you want more further information, go to our website. Don't forget about next week. So the fourth lecture series is how to build a team. So we'll be having Susan Graham from Biocarbon Engineering, who is a startup from one of our alumni, and they have recently kind of grown greatly and have recruited kind of their initial team as well as now their kind of wider team. So kind of some tips on how best to do that. So moving back to today, I'm very pleased to have Robert Hockin here, who's going to talk us through some ideas on how to market your business idea. Robert has a wealth of experience and has worked with such brands as Unilever, Dell, Nokia, as just a few examples. So, and we will leave a little bit of time at the end to take a few questions as well. Okay? Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. Just before I kick off, I just want to ask a question. How many of you guys own a business right now, have started? How many are planning on launching the next 6 months? Next 5 years? Perhaps never? There's a few of you here. Never? I just checked my email. I subscribe to this company in New York that produces insights mainly aimed at investment. And the headline was that in the last 15 years, 52% of Fortune 500 companies have disappeared. And I suppose it's just ironic that came up because as somebody who has been both, I've an interesting background insofar as I have been an entrepreneur, but I've been an entrepreneur largely in the area of working with companies to help them develop their brands and sell their products. And so I've seen the perspective of working with very large international corporations and seeing why so many of those Fortune 500 companies have disappeared. And I think that the big part of my discussion with you today is kind of going to be a bit of a no BS take on what I've seen, what I've experienced, what I think the opportunities are, and why I think for entrepreneurs like yourselves, there's such a massive opportunity out there to do something amazing. Just generally, the background for today, I'll talk to you a little bit about what I've done and my own philosophy, and then a couple of sections of information, what I think is the benefit of being a pirate, the evolution of channels, and the disillusioned consumer, and then I'll talk to you about a few critical tools that you guys should think about when developing your own business. So starting with who I am and why I do this. So 3 things you should know about me. First of all, phase 1, I was very young, moved to the UK in 1986, spent 2 years here, returned to Canada, started a business. That business, started by somebody who was very young and dumb, eventually was taken over by a firm out of the US. Of course, I made no money on it. They really just took over my office and employed me for a while. And then I left, and I got the bug into me of being my own boss. And I suppose that really drove me. And shortly after, I started another business. When I was 27 years old, I started an advertising agency with 2 partners in the creative space. And over a period of 3 years, the one company turned into a group of 4 companies. And we were working internationally with some major brands. And in the course of that time, my expertise, my background really is a strategic planner. And as a strategic planner in the area of creative services advertising, my job is really to look at consumer behavior and understand what motivates people to think and act and how to align a brand's purpose with that consumer need. And I suppose what I learned in that process was the importance of looking at various forms of communication and channels to reach people. Public relations, for instance. I won't bore you with the details of a client I had, but their entire brand, which was a major, I will tell you, the brand is Cisco. At the time, Cisco's entire business, in the way that it marketed itself to investors, talent, and customers, was all driven through PR. And in that period of my life, I really understood that it's really the quality of the message and the channels that you need to selectively use to get the message out there. But more fundamentally, I was also an entrepreneur, so I was learning the importance that in the creative field, my job is to help companies spin their stories, so to speak. But I've learned over time that if an airline is crap, you can advertise what you want. The airline's still crap, and that's the brand. And so I suppose over time I've become more and more cynical about my own industry, and that's really phase 2, honing my craft. I went from being a pretty young guy to a much older guy, and in the course of my time, I've had the chance to be, I've been an executive in agencies like Ogilvy and Mather, Young and Rubicam. I've worked in places like New York and Chicago and Toronto and here. I served on the global board of a company called Fitch, which is one of the world's foremost retail design businesses, and I've had the chance to work with some of the guys you've heard already, but including guys like Diageo, Procter & Gamble, and I've marketed all forms of products. And what I came to over time was, first of all, I felt like selling hours as a consultant was a bit of a boobs game. I felt like companies, the corporations that I worked with, these large companies who desperately need creative thinking, increasingly couldn't take on what I was saying to them. They couldn't filter it in. You know, I just came literally to this room today from a meeting with a very large multinational corporation. I was sitting around with a bunch of guys, well-educated, been in the business a long time, and the filters through which they take in information and what they can do in these massive corporations is limited. And this is why so many businesses in the Fortune 500 have failed, is that the speed at which consumers change and their willingness to take on new brands and new behaviors is such that large companies can't keep pace anymore. So, you know, what we've really seen is, on the consumer side, massive change in people's attention. You know, their attention is almost non-existent unless there's something meaningful in it. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the history of brand building later on in the presentation. But what's happened at the same time is there's been so much choice in terms of channels that you can tap into. There's also so much choice in terms of the products that are available. So every single category, you know, think about how many SKUs of toothpaste there are, how many car brands there are out there. You know, all of those companies are desperately vying for that same wallet that isn't growing exponentially to keep pace with these products. So the choice has changed, and cynicism, what we believe from companies that are talking to us today, has really changed. So, you know, why should you bother? And under those circumstances, you know, somebody said to me, I think maybe it was the last time I did this lecture, they said, well, is there any point in starting a company? And the fact is, of course there's a point. If you're a shareholder in Uber, there's massive point in starting a company. The thing, though, is that what you've got to get beyond, and I'll talk more about this in a few minutes, you've got to get beyond just thinking the world needs another product and get to the real heart of how your product's going to improve the lives of the people you're trying to sell to. And so, you know, why bother? First of all, it's never been easier to start a business. I mean, basically, it costs you nothing to set up a corporation. It's cost you nothing to get a web page set up. It costs you nothing. You know, so if you've got a reasonable idea, you know, why not take a punt? The other thing is, you know, big companies can be taken. When I was first interviewed here at Oxford, I remember I said one of the things that I found compelling about, you know, being associated with a business program is my own experience showed me that all these companies can be taken. You know, this big company I met with today, those guys can be massively displaced with smart companies, with smart ideas. And that's the power today. There's an amazing company in Wales. It's not a very big company, but the guy started, it's a denim company. It's called Hewitt Denim. And at the time, this guy went back to his hometown in Cardigan, and he discovered that there was a 400-person factory that made denim there, that for years for Marks & Spencer, and overnight Marks & Spencer closed the business down, moved it to Morocco, all their production. And he said, you know, my job was, he said, there's all these crafts people that were around that have been making denim forever. So I came back and I decided the circumstances were right. He said, I didn't need to sell to a retailer. I could sell direct to consumers, and I could tell great stories. And my business, I could bring 400 people their jobs back. And he said, circumstances such that, you know, the rules have changed for a company to do something meaningful and go and find new consumers and burst all the channels that they've traditionally had to use. And the thing, I suppose, why bother for me, what I love about entrepreneurship is it's the ultimate meritocracy. You know, it's very easy to work in a big company and hide behind doors and hide behind data. But as an entrepreneur, you either know you're winning or you don't. And I've had my fair share of both ups and downs. You know, and I can tell you that what I love about it is you are on the sharp end. As a business owner, it's your decisions that make the difference. So, in terms of, you know, fundamentally this discussion is really about marketing and selling your business or your product. So what is marketing? It's essentially why you are what you are and how you're promoted. But something to keep in mind, you probably would have come across this whole notion of kind of purpose. And what I would say is, for a long time, we've said, many decades ago, it used to be you got to come up with a great ad campaign to catch the consumer's imagination, and then it became, about brand. Brand trumps all. Brand is kind of the collection of beliefs that someone holds about you or your business. And so when you think about this, you have to remember that the belief system someone holds about your brand trumps marketing. Marketing is a series of activities or plans that you execute to project the image of your business or to drive sales for your business. But brand, what you are, speaks more loudly than what you'll ever say. Keep that in mind. But purpose trumps brand. This is really important. If you have, I'll use that airline for instance. I would love for a CEO to show up at an airport unannounced and get in an economy lineup at Christmas and see what that experience is like, and then get jammed on a plane in economy and get crappy service from the staff, and then justify why they will spend millions of pounds on an advertising campaign to say that they're flying the friendly skies. It's BS. This is a company that is very operationally minded but has lost a sense of purpose. And what I would say to you is, at this point, for you guys, fundamentally, the most important thing you can do is define your purpose. As a guy that you may one day have to compete against or may hire to work with you, I can tell you right now, my job is made either much harder as a competitor or much easier as somebody who's got to work with you if you get the purpose right. Everything else falls into place. Your brand makes more sense, and how you market that brand makes more sense. So, but you got to remember something. At the end of the day, it's fine to have a chart, it's fine to have a strategy. But if no one notices you, it's all academic. So what you've got to do is get past your own ego, get past your own meaning for these things. There's a great organization in here that focuses on social entrepreneurship. And doing good is not enough. Doing good in a way that motivates consumer behavior is what's vitally important. Because if you don't do that, doing good will never happen. So it's vitally important that you've got to remember that if your customer doesn't clearly understand your value in their life, everything is academic. So I'll talk to you very quickly about the benefit of being a pirate. And what I mean by this is the benefit of thinking differently, the benefit of even conceiving that you will not follow the well-trodden path of going and getting a job, but actually create a business for yourself. What I'm going to tell you is a series of stories that all come from big companies that I've worked with that kind of build my argument. So first of all, my specialization is in, I suppose, understanding women and in food, FMCG. Now, so why is that? I suppose I have a mother and 3 sisters. I now have a wife and 3 daughters. I suppose I'm immersed in women, so I thought, why not spend more time with them? But what's interesting to me about women is women drive most of the decisions around purchases, particularly in a family setting. And when you understand, for instance, in the food space, what's interesting about food is, and I'll show you in a minute, a picture of a grocery store. Grocery stores as a model haven't changed really that much in 60, 70 years. But what's interesting is women have changed and mums have changed. So typical Gen X woman knows on average 4 recipes. The typical millennial woman knows on average 0 recipes. Now, if she's a mum, in the vast majority of cases, she is still responsible for putting dinner on the table. So every single day in every household where there is a family, the same question gets asked every day, what's for dinner? And every day it requires a different answer. And that answer is provided by somebody who doesn't really know how to cook that well. So the fact is, she goes into a store, and the store is really presenting two opposing opportunities for her. On one side is a set of ingredients that she doesn't really know how to use, and the other side are ready meals that take all sense of ownership away from her. So that's the reality. She's interested in being engaged. She wants to be inspired, but the channel that she uses that supplies her isn't very inspiring. Now, in the midst of that, company like Kraft comes along, one I've worked on. And so they sit around, all these guys. I remember I sat in a room, there was 35 people that had been flown in to do a one-day workshop. The outcome of the workshop was to write an advertising agency brief for shredded cheese in a resealable bag. And at the end of, I've spent more hours than I can count listening to women talk about their needs. I've spent time in their kitchens, I've done shop-alongs with them. I'm sitting in a boardroom at Kraft headquarters talking about how we sell this shredded cheese. I don't even think it is cheese, actually. I think it's an edible petroleum product, but anyway. So the meeting starts at 9 o'clock. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, this guy stands up and he says, Wait a second. Does she have a fire in her belly about her product, or is she passionate about her product? And I went, oh, for fuck's sakes. And my boss went, get your game face back on. I was like, has anyone tried this product? And this is what, it's fascinating to see what happens. In an environment like that where you're so isolated, no one actually puts themselves in the shoes of the consumer. It's all theoretical. So eventually, I was the managing director of 2 offices for a big company. I decided to leave my job and focus just on food. And I had a chance to interview this executive vice president. He was an executive vice president of a company called Loblaws. This is the same company, the family-owned business that owns Selfridges and Fortnum & Mason. So he's a bigwig, $40 billion company. I say to him, I'm going to ask you point blank, why do so many products on the shelf suck? And he didn't even blink. He said, I'll tell you exactly why they suck. He said, because food companies don't know anything about food. I said, what? He said, no, they know how to get more, they can streamline the efficiency in their supply chain, but they don't taste food. Now think about this. You're a company that is huge. You've got all the intelligence, all the budget. You've got all of the resources to make something great. But because you're so distant from understanding what makes people tick, you end up creating crappy products. So here's where the problem starts. Metro, multi-billion-dollar grocery retailer. I'm hired as part of a team to lead what they said was the creation of a store of the future. And the store of the future, in their language, was going to basically be a game changer in the way shoppers perceive them. You know, the grocery industry is massive. It's one of the most high-frequency turnover businesses, very, very low margins. It's a massive industry. And they wanted to create a store experience that was going to be a game changer for them in the way people perceive them. So I said, okay, I'm going to start by interviewing the executive team, but I want to interview you one-on-one. There's 15 executives, 14 of them are men, average age 48, none of them shop with their wives. And so I said, okay, step back, you're the guardians of this ambition, why don't you tell me what you think your business is fundamentally about? And at the end of 15 interviews, 2 people mentioned food and 1 person mentioned women. Again, now think about that. As an entrepreneur who's considering starting a business, you know, you're going to be looking at these massive arches that sit there, these companies, and you've got to realize that your greatest strength right now is to connect this with this more profoundly than they do. They can beat you with assets, they can beat you with money, but they cannot beat you with your ability to connect more profoundly with your subject matter and your consumer. So what ends up happening to these companies is quite interesting. They start to rely on research. They do a lot of research. I gave a lecture at a conference right behind somebody who was a PhD in research, and she was doing a whole study on eye tracking analysis. She was presenting this case study around a frozen pizza product, and she was saying, do you see how people's eyes light on the starburst in the top? Well, let me tell you why that's meaningful. And I got up afterward, I said, with due respect, if that's what you've got to focus on, you're dead. It's too late. If what you've got to do is rely on eye tracking to understand whether you put the starburst in the top right or the top left, if that's what you think makes a difference, that you're missing the point fundamentally. And so what ends up happening is companies then, what do they start to do? They start to drop their price. I'm working with a champagne brand right now, and they just discovered, shockingly, that 96% of all the products that are bought here in the UK are bought on sale. People, 4% will pay full price for the product, 96% will pay if it's on sale. Now, House of Fraser, this was interesting because they said, I interviewed a bunch of executives in there, I featured them in a couple of articles I've written, and one of the things they said was, you know, we are so desperate, we're trying to be seen as being like, not quite at the end of, say, a Harrods or a Selfridges, but we're trying to be seen as a premium department store. And they said, but every time you walk by the store windows, we're always on sale. So how can we possibly build a brand with consumers to see us as high-end when we can never have the courage to step away and charge full price for our product? So at the end of the day, you end up with scenarios like this. You know, first of all, get a company like HTC I've worked for. In Germany, they said 3,000 stores sell a product, and we have no idea which stores sell most product. So they are massive, they have deep pockets, but they've lost control of where the opportunity is in finding consumers. They don't look at data in the right way, or they don't connect in the right way. Mars, the Mars brand, a confectionery brand, met with them recently, and they said, our strategy is really simple still. We've got a product, we run a television ad, and then we buy whatever media is available in store. And we know, by looking at it, television advertising doesn't work the way it once did. Most people are actually making the decision at the shelf, and that media that's in store, most of it doesn't work. And so these large companies then stuck. They can't innovate their way even thinking about how to promote their product. And so what ends up happening, this final story is one that from Wall Sausages. Big company, Kerry Foods owed Wall Sausages. They hired a big ad agency. They spent a lot of money on an advertising campaign. And they said, I said, how'd it go? They said, well, it didn't work. We didn't sell a single product. I said, why not? They said, well, because people can buy a better sausage than ours. I said, well, why don't you make a better sausage? They said, can't afford it. Like, you can't afford it. You're going to spend more money on marketing to people that don't know that they can get a better product. So herein lies the opportunity. This is the reality for these large companies. You know, this quote, as we acquire more data, we have the ability to find many more statistically significant correlations. The haystack gets bigger and the needle we're looking for is harder to find. And then this, according to somebody at Coke, we now have so much research we can argue both sides of any strategy. And so the problem is that these companies are so locked in themselves that you produce those stories I just told you. So thus, you know, business become more about the operation of the customer. You know, there's a study done by McKinsey in the US that showed majority of marketing directors invest in programs that they know don't work, and they only do it because it's the way they always do it. You know, they fear the focus is more on the competition than on leadership. You know, this whole idea of leadership, believe me, it takes courage. The company I came from earlier, if they want to succeed, they have got to show courage. There's just no way around it. They just cannot keep executing what they're doing because they're losing market share. They're losing shelf space. Their budgets are getting cut. Their margins are getting cut. There's nothing they can do other than be courageous and stand up and break the mold of what they're doing. And herein lies your great opportunity, because you're not stuck in a trench yet. They're in a trench, and as long as they're there, just kick dirt in their face and go take their business from them. So you're at a unique point. And here's the thing I tell you, your battle, if you're going to be successful, it's going to be won or lost even before you write the business plan. The business plan is a vitally necessary tool for your business, but the reason for your business is even more important, and you've got to figure that out. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the evolution of channels. So back in the heyday of advertising, post-war America, at a time when consumers were finding their newfound wealth and their newfound freedom, you know, advertising and people's relationship to brands was the early days. People wanted to believe brands. They believed in their potential and their power. Interestingly, in a lot of developing markets today, you're seeing a very similar mindset with consumers towards brands. But of course, we have become so cynical that this time is long gone. In the 80s, that was really the peak of advertising, particularly broadcast advertising. You know, you could run an ad on one of a few stations, and you would sell your product. You reach 80% of your customer base. You know, and at that time, it was very simple. You'd stimulate interest. People would go to a store. You could buy through catalogs, but mainly it was through store. Stores could essentially just be warehouses full of product. It was job done. It was really simple. And then this guy came along, and he created the internet. And that was the first page that he published. And now this is the reality. And what happened in that time, because I worked in that time, I remember speaking to clients who said to me, do you really think we need a website? It's like, yeah, I think you need a website. What happened with this is, you know, you could tell a consumer that their whites would be made whiter with your laundry detergent, but then suddenly the internet allowed them to check whether that was true. Not only could they find out the truth of a brand, and today, by the way, and I'll talk more at the end about social media, you know, this piece of work I've just recently done with Unilever, we discovered that mums with children under the age of 2 spend 1 out of every 3 minutes online on Facebook. So a third of their time they spend on Facebook. Behavior changes when the kids are older because they're probably more confident, you know, they rely less. But still 99% of mums share deals and opportunities with their peer group. So if you're lying to them, they're going to find out about it quickly. If you got something great, it spreads like wildfire, and that's all because of this. You know, the ability to go, that hotel sucks, and here's 500 people will validate that statement. That changed the game, and then of course you've got this. That further changed the game because not only, you know, if you were a big retailer, people would go in, check out the TV, pick the right one, check the price, then go and get it, order it online, whatever. And challenge everybody, and of course, as I've just said, then you got this, where the consumer's in control. So everything's changed, right? So I've just taken you very briefly in a 60-year history of advertising and brands and how we motivated consumer behavior and interest, and everything's changed. But here's the reality. That's the reality. That's the reality. You know, Marks and Spencer, a couple of years ago, produced yet another crummy report, earnings report for their business, and the CEO came out and said, we're doubling down on our internet investment. It's like Marks and Spencer stores are where hope goes to die. Dude, you don't need a website, you need to fix your stores for that reason. Of course, you got that. That's the reality. So the more we think things change, a lot of these companies remain entrenched. So what you've got to do is you've got to think about, if that's your opportunity, you got to fundamentally ask yourself, why should anybody care about you? Why should anybody care about your product? This is the first thing I ask people, any client of mine. Yeah, I get you sell cheese, but why should they care about you? You know, and don't stop asking, and then figure out how to make them care. Because this is the reality. We have a very disillusioned consumer. They're a very, very hard target to reach. As I've said before, you know, the fact is, this company I met with earlier today said that in their category, one of the problems they've got is that people come into the category, they spend 9 seconds making a decision. 9 seconds. They said, we want to make it 15 seconds. It's like, okay, 15 seconds. Okay, well, why don't we put tape on the floor and then maybe get tangled up? I don't know. So you got to keep in mind, these people are hard to reach. But something you got to keep in mind, emotion drives vast majority of purchase decisions. People may they may rationalize to you why they needed that particular BMW. But in fact, most purchase decisions are emotional. You got to remember that. You know, it's easy for you, particularly in a business context, in a business school, where everything causes you to be so rational. But you've got to make that leap, because most people are making decisions based with their heart. So here's something to keep in mind. This is a study that was done in the US, and it was looking at digital natives. Digital natives are guys that are 20-something, very connected, always connected to a screen. What they found was that in a typical non-working hour, the typical digital native cycled through 27 different media outlets. What's significant about that is if you went back 30 years ago, they might cycle through 4 media outlets in an hour. Now it's 27, because they're always connected to a screen. And if the content doesn't appeal to them, it has no value to them, they switch off and they go somewhere else. They're constantly going to another media outlet to get information. Hard to reach. This was another interesting one, because what's happened is it became harder to reach these consumers through traditional means. We started to double down, as I said, in producing websites. But Nielsen produced a study. It's actually dropped now. But this study suggests that the typical consumer spends less than 56 seconds on a website. And of course, as you guys well know, it's all self-directed. You know, you're not browsing websites the way that you might do in a shopping mall. So the website is, your website doesn't guarantee just being there that they're going to pay attention. This is the other thing, of course. Say you decide to open a shop. This is the reality for most brands. This was a study done by the UK Retail Council, and said that 50% of retail workers lie or send customers to other stores due to a lack of product knowledge. 20% of them do it every single day. So in that environment, where they don't pay attention the way they once did, they don't spend much time on your website, and even if they go into your store, they're often not getting a great experience. They're hard to reach. So this is the reality as well, of course, is that consumer, because they have so much choice, because many of those decisions are already pre-made, they get into a store like this, and they're making the majority of their decisions within 3 feet of the product in about an average 12 seconds. And if you're in an FMCG context, I know that I'm sure most of you aren't going to be in FMCG, but it's, I could recount similar stories in other categories. The fact is that the vast majority, like in the champagne example, it's 96%, but the average is about 70% of products are all bought on offer. And part of this is because people are overwhelmed by choice, and they are underwhelmed by why. Why should they pay more? They've got so many choices in every category. As I said at the outset, whether it's car brands or whether it's suits or airlines or hotels, there's just too much choice. So this was a study that was done that suggested that, just to give you some context, is the typical grocery store has got about 35,000 items in it, and the typical household buys less than 1%. And what they also discovered was that no two households buy the same thing. When this study was done, it was done over 12 months. In the same year, there was 190,000 new products introduced. So to give you some perspective, they're buying about 300 items a year. 300 items. In every category, they've got 2 or 3 brands that they'll choose that in their minds are equal, and they'll choose based on what's on sale, why so many of these things get sold. So to enter that fray, you need to be aware that this is what you're up against. And so the problem is the price of not understanding how to move people for you guys, and that's why I start off by saying, is defining your sense of purpose and understanding how that can be meaningful to people is vitally important. Because all of those companies I've referenced have got endless amounts of money to create ads that don't get noticed, to create websites that don't get visited, to create packaging that doesn't motivate purchase decisions. And so the vast majority, even the FMCG category, fail. 75% fail. And you think to yourself, these are big companies with endless resource. How is it possible to fail? So I'm going to talk to you about some tools that I'd recommend you take a look at. These tools, in terms of the templates, are going to be available to you online. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the brand essence. So brand is the quality or qualities that make a thing what it is. A brand, as I've said already, is really a combination of both logic and emotion. It's all of what we perceive. You know, we don't want to ever buy something we think we're paying too much for, but we will. I mean, look at Apple. You know, Apple's saying that their products are going to go up several £100s because of the fluctuation in currency, and they'll still have lineups out the door. You know, I used to work with Dell. I've worked with Dell, IBM, Lenovo, Nokia, and Motorola, and all of them can tell me why their products were better than Apple, and no one was lining up outside the stores. So emotion is that their brand is so strong that even when people have to pay several £100s more for this product, they'll rationalize why it was worth it. So brands also, you got to keep in mind, a lot of agencies will talk about brand, and what they're really talking about is logo. They'll talk about brand, they really talk about ad campaigns, but it's much more than that. It's really, brand is mainly about a behavior. It's mainly about your commitment to your customer that you ruthlessly reinforce every day. So consider this for a moment. See, this is the power of a brand. You know, I can show you that, and you know immediately who they are and what they stand for. You know, here's another powerful brand. I can show you that, and you know immediately what they stand for, positively and negatively. But my favorite is that. And you might think it's nuts, but the reason I think this is the greatest brand symbol of all is if I said to you, anybody in here, tell me what their customer service representatives look like, you'd all be able to tell me. If I said to you, tell me what you think a stay in one of their ships would be like, you'd all be able to tell me. That's the symbol of a brand, and everything that spills out of it. That's what you're driving for, is the creation of continuity so that I see you, I understand you, and every interaction I have with you is consistent. There are badges, brands are badges that define what we stand for, our values, our position in society, and who we are. It helps us choose and makes us buy in. So the key questions you got to ask yourself about the notion of brand and brand essence is this. You know, as I said to you already, you've got to ask yourself, why is the world better with you in it? Who needs to care and why? What do they value? How do we live up to our values and purpose for those we serve? How is this different than the competition? What's it worth, and how do we convince people to pay for it? I mean, this is so fundamental, and you might think, wow, that's kind of rudimentary, isn't it? But so many companies I work with don't do that. They just miss the plot. That's why so many companies go bust, because they don't draw that red thread that constantly reinforces their value and why people should, largely because they don't understand it themselves. So one of the planning tools I'd strongly encourage you to take a look at is this kind of path to purchase. I'll give you an example. Path to purchase, I just conducted this for the champagne brand. And what's fascinating was we looked at what 5 champagne brands were saying in the market. We looked at it from all forms. We looked at the advertising they were doing. We looked at their sponsorship, their promotions. We looked at all of their press releases for 5 different brands. We looked at it for a couple of years. Fascinating. So this is the onslaught, the millions and millions of pounds that are spent pushing messages out to consumers. Then we did a social listening study. And what was fascinating was no one mentioned brands. Nobody. They talked about fizz, they talked about bubbles, they talked about champs. They certainly never mentioned a campaign. They talked about the meaning of the product. They didn't talk about the meaning of the brand. This is fundamental. These are brands that are not cutting through. So, you know, if you understand the path to purchase, what we eventually looked at was, okay, so let's just wear the shoes of our consumer for a minute. And I swear to you, you will get more out of this if you do this yourselves. You've got to imagine, if you're selling to an 18-year-old and you're not 18, imagine you are, or find an 18-year-old and get them to go through the process of buying a product in the category. If you're selling to somebody who's 60, pretend it or find somebody who is and do it. Because what you will see, and I've done this many, many times for brands, and this is exactly what happened to the Champagne brand, is that when we did the path to purchase analysis, what we recognized was that in the critical moment where someone makes a purchase decision, brands are invisible and there's no value story. So people don't understand language around champagne. So when they get to the shelf, what they see is a product that's 35 pounds, 40 pounds, 45 pounds. They don't understand what the brands mean. And in that critical moment, we documented it. They look online, they go to a bar, they do this, they do that, they might pick up a GQ, whatever it is, and then they get to the shelf or they get to the bar, and there's nothing there that influences their decision. So, some additional examples are fashion industry. Fashion, you go into a store, do you know that vast majority of decisions about what to purchase are made in the change room? How many fashion stores do you go into where the change room actually facilitates and encourages that? They're often the last thing to be considered, the last thing to be designed. There's not very much room. So think about that. If you know that 70% of decisions are being made in a place, that's where you invest. The other thing is nappies. I worked with Procter & Gamble on Pampers. Pampers is one of the biggest nappy brands in the world. What they always had was, because in their category, their big threat is private label. This is brands that the store owns. And of course, they make more money on those brands, and they want to promote those brands more readily. But of course, the brand leaders, the branded leaders like Procter & Gamble, are the guys that spend the money to drive interest in the category. What they discovered is that the only way for them to stay ahead of private label is to invest in innovation. The problem is that they use a very antiquated way of promoting that innovation. And so they invest this money, try and convince you that you should spend more because they're innovation, but they run an ad, and people don't pay attention because they feel they've already got a solution. They go into the store, and the problem is that women that are shopping for nappies are on autopilot. They're actually using color to decide which brand they're going to purchase, and that's based on past behavior. So it's difficult for that company to understand where to tell its story. And yet they execute these programs, as I said earlier. But the point is that they've never walked and understood, how do we change, how do we raise someone's awareness of something new in a category where they feel they've already got it covered? How do you do that? And understanding the path to purchase is vital. And then a final example of this path to purchase idea. I did an 11-country study for Nokia. And one of the things that was interesting about this was between periods of buying a product, I buy a product and then my next purchase cycle. In that period, about 75% of products are new. So I walk into a store, and this was the same whether it was in Nigeria or it was Germany. The average shop has got about 150 devices on display. They're very badly merchandised as a general rule. Consumer walks in, 3/4 of it's new. The very first thing they do is they turn to a staff member. First thing they do. And where's the last place that these companies invest? Staff. So the staff member is somebody's like schmuck like me comes up and I say, can you help me navigate? That staff member, we discovered, asks 3-4 questions. Do you listen to music? Do you take pictures, etc.? And they've got a small portfolio of products that they believe in, mostly ones that they use themselves, that they sell. And we discovered 90% of what's on the wall never even gets referenced. So the fact of the matter is, if you didn't do that, you'd think, well, cripes, let's run an ad, let's do our thing. And I'll tell you, I worked on Nokia's largest product launch in their history, the Windows Phone. To give you some perspective, Nokia and Microsoft spent $1 billion launching the product. $1 billion, okay? So the CEO of Nokia, unbeknownst to the store staff, was on the Champs-Élysées, walks into an orange store, walks up to a store clerk and says, hey, I'm interested in buying one of those new Nokia devices. Store clerk goes, you don't want one of those, you want an iPhone. $1 billion spent launching that product. The path to purchase analysis I'm about to suggest to you is, the moment might be how clean the toilets are. That might be the moment that makes the difference for people. So key considerations. First of all, you got to understand the difference between a consumer and a shopper. Consumer is a 5-year-old that likes sugary cereal. Shopper is his mom. They're not always the same people. Most companies are not good at distinguishing between these two things, but they're very different. That kid likes Cocoa Puffs. He likes the cartoon in the pack. His mom wants the kid to have less sugar. Very, very different motivations and decisions around choosing the product. The other thing is behavior trumps channel. I've alluded to this already. You've got to see the world through the eyes of your consumer. That will get you closer to figuring this stuff out. This is what most of your larger competitors don't do. You've got to understand the moment of truth. The moment of truth is something that was coined a number of years ago, a couple decades ago, by Procter & Gamble. And they said the moment of truth is actually at the shelf. So again, this will enable you to weight your investment. The inclination of a lot of companies are, what we're going to do is we're going to go out there and we're actually going to launch an ad campaign for this. But if it doesn't resonate, you're going to burn through more money than you can shake a stick at. So knowing the moment of truth is vital for you. The other thing is, ego is going to lose you money. You all want to look good to your parents. You all want to show your buddies that you're doing well. But the reality is if you invest money stupidly just to get profile, then you're going to lose. So you got to make the right consideration, right decision based on where your consumer's at. So this analysis is a very, very simple tool to use. What I do, I generally follow this. I just go through what prompts the purchase, the need, what's triggering the purchase need. My car's broken down. I've never had a car before. Or here's a better example. 18-year-old guy wants to buy a guitar, 48-year-old guy wants to buy a guitar. So they both want to buy guitars. This guy wants to be a rock star. This guy wants to look young again. They're both going to end up at a guitar, but they're both going to use different paths to get there. They're both going to be motivated by different messages to get there. Figuring that out and understanding what's prompting the trigger and then what leads naturally is, now how do they plan for it? Do they do, I've worked on categories where most of the research was done online, and then they went and made, I worked with a car brand recently. I was amazed to discover this, but I think the average number of dealerships someone visits today is 2. It used to be 10. Why? Because they're making all their decision outside the store. Then they go to the dealership and they make the final decision there. Like, it's amazing. So, but it's not always the same. Like, look at Apple. Apple, I don't know how much, I know they sell a lot of iPhones online, but the reality is I don't know how many of those laptops they sell online. I don't know. Their stores are vital to their business. Getting that right is vital to their business. So again, understanding the planning process is key, and looking at identifying opportunities. Then, figuring out so in the planning, that planning is one thing, but where are they purchasing? Is it a convenience store? One of the things in the spirits category, for instance, is that if someone buys a bottle of booze, a bottle of wine, a case of beer in a convenience store, it's generally, they start to consume it within 3 hours. In a grocery store, it's not the same. So understanding the behavior. So, why is that relevant? Well, because I'm probably more interested in a chilled beverage in a convenience store than I am in a grocery store. It's a small thing. That's what I mean. So what's the channel that they're purchasing in? And then what motivations drive the purchase? Peace of mind? Price is almost never it. Price is almost never it. Using the grocery store example, the research I've done with women was phenomenal, because if you pay attention to every grocery store here in the UK, they obsess over being low price. You know what consumers told me? They said, first of all, I choose my store based on familiarity of layout. Well, all grocery stores look the same. What does that mean? Well, because I think grocery shopping is a chore. There's nothing fun about hitting the grocery store. It could be fun, but it's not fun. So it's more important to me that I know how to navigate the store. That's the most important thing. The second thing they told me is, and I actually don't think that I'm getting the best deal. It doesn't matter to me. I think I pay less for some things and more for others. I think that generally I'm getting a reasonable deal. Study by Kantar, pan-European study, but the focus in this particular instance, this quote, is from the UK. Only about 17% of shoppers are hardcore price shoppers. The rest will trade up. The rest will pay more. But you wouldn't believe that if you watched a lot of companies. So understanding what motivates purchase decision is key. And then how is the product being used? This is an interesting thing. I worked years ago with Starbucks. Starbucks started to sell their Starbucks coffee through grocery stores. It was fascinating. It's not like that now, of course, because it's become so massively ubiquitous. But at the time, what we discovered was that by conducting ethnographies, this is literally living in the life of a consumer, right? You're in their home, you're in their life. We discovered that the product wasn't selling in grocery, even though it was a massively popular product. What people said was, the reason is, Starbucks is special to me. I have my Starbucks in the weekend. What I drink is the crappy coffee during the week when I'm rushing out the door. So I don't buy good coffee at the grocery store. I buy crappy coffee at the grocery store. It's the context of the channel, what was motivating the product in their mind, and the channel was out of sync. That's why it wasn't selling well. So understanding, again, how do you make the experience of the product a game changer? How can you elevate that if you're a Starbucks? How can you make that grocery store work? Or how can you stop the grocery store and go elsewhere? And then ultimately influence. What can we do? We know, I quoted you earlier, but 99% of moms, people will talk. You don't have to do anything about it. People will talk. How do you get people to talk about your product in a meaningful way? The one that I love, which is just so masterfully simple, is GoPro. The nature of the product is shareable content, right? And it's like, what do people love to do? They love to shoot stuff in their GoPro and then share it with people. It's fantastic. Is there an opportunity for you with your own product? Now I'm going to talk to you about social media. Social media is, to me, I suppose, it's the ultimate truth. It's the ultimate truth because if you suck, people will tell others that you suck, and if it's great, you don't have to do anything about it. But here's the problem with social media. I'm just going to quote, and forgive me for this language, by the way, let me say in advance, forgive me for this language. This is a quote from Charlie Brooker, Guardian journalist. He said, here's the way it used to work. TV advertising used to work like this. You sat in your sofa while creatives were paid to throw a bucket of shit in your face, and today you're expected to sit in the bucket filled with your own shit and tip it over your head while filming yourself on your mobile. And that, I can tell you how many meetings I've been in, how many campaigns I've worked on where that is so true. It's like, what we're going to do is we're going to get people to take a selfie eating our block of cheese, and we're going to get them to put it on Facebook. Who does this? Nobody does this, unless you're a lunatic. And so the problem is, you've got to think about this with social media. It is all about content. It's not about you, it is about them. If you want it to work, you got to think about that. So the industry gets you to think like this. You got to have this, you got to have this, you got to have this. I'm consulting with a company right now that sells B2B. And they said, well, how come you're not referencing our Facebook and our Google Plus and our Twitter? It's like, well, you got no content. Well, what do you want me to reference? Is there anything on Google Plus? It's a business to business. You're selling to executives. Facebook? Are you kidding? Nope, that's the way the industry wants you to think. And they want you to think of stuff like this. You know, we're going to show you an ad. We're going to get you to put your picture up. You know, we're going to quote stats and data. And it's all, I'm telling you right now, it is mostly meaningless. In reality, what you got to do is you got to think about this. First of all, you know, what do people want and need? Where are the opportunities to solve problems and add value? Where? Are you making their lives better? Content. How can your brand answer those wants and needs, and where are they already, and how can you intercept them at the right time in the right place, which is what we've talked about already with the path to purchase. If you get the content right, I've just recently raised a round of investment to launch a new business venture, which is a retail model. It's all online. And the proof of my concept is entirely this. I will never advertise. It will all be delivered through social media. Now, I could be nuts, but a lot of my competitors raise literally hundreds of millions of dollars, and they spend tens of millions of dollars in advertising. But I know this. I know people talk. My service is aimed at moms, and I can tell you this. If something's good for them, they will share it. So to me, the proof of whether I'm doing the right thing or not is whether people are willing to do that, not whether I can spend millions of dollars in advertising. So here's an important lesson. You've got to understand the difference between branded content, which is stuff that you do. You know, there's corporate-driven messages, and there's consumer-driven messages. And 2/3 of what influences consumers is the message they drive themselves, word of mouth, versus being a content brand. Again, you got to remember, I said this company earlier today, the one thing that saves you is you know that the consumer always wants their life to be better. So what is it you're going to do to help make that happen? The guys who do it best, GoPro, Nike's masterful. Other guys like, you know, Jamie Oliver. I mean, this guy, he's a brand. He's not a person anymore. These guys are masterful at it. They improve people's lives. So the fact is, interactions have become ubiquitous. You got to remember that your content, you're competing. I was working on something recently for younger millennials, and I discovered that the typical young millennial spends 5 hours a day on social media, 5 hours a day. And they're not spending that time cruising Coke ads. They spend that time actually sharing, interacting, finding interesting stuff. In that 5-hour time frame, you got to remember, everybody's piling into that 5 hours. Their buddy, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, whatever it is, plus every single brand that wants to reach them. You got to remember that. You're up against everybody who's trying to communicate in that space. And the only way to win, this is why GoPro is so successful, is they make it great. So that's the point I just referenced. So here's the thing. Do your homework, know your audience, know why your brand should be in their life, some of the stuff I've said already, and understand how your content can have meaning. Create great content. You know, I've said to you, know your purpose. If you know your purpose, this all becomes easy. And then invest in creating something meaningful content-wise. And then get it out there. Make sure it's in the right channels, contextually relevant. Don't be in Facebook if you shouldn't be there. Pick the right channels. You know, in the ideal, here's the sweet spot, is that there are owned channels, there are paid channels, and then there are earned channels. The thing you got to make, well, if you take a look at this offline, I'm running out of time, so I'm rushing a bit here, is that you realize that the sweet spot is to combine all of those. Picking the right ones, making sure that you're reaching the right people to influence, paying for it where you need to. And then ultimately measure it. and make it better. The thing you got to remember, when I start off this presentation, I said 52% of Fortune 500 companies have disappeared. It's because they stopped improving. Don't be like that. So adding it all up, here's the thing. As I said earlier, what you are speaks louder than what you say. That's a paraphrase of Ralph Waldo Emerson, but that is so true. What you are speaks louder than what you say. That is the fundamental of your purpose, and your brand will benefit by it. A great product makes friends, regardless of marketing. Marketing just accelerates introductions, remember that. And then any business can be taken, so you got to decide which side you're going to be on. It's going to start right here, right now, before you write the business plan. So, questions?
Hello. You mentioned two kind of conflicting points to me. The first one is what you said earlier, 75% of products sales on sale, like the champagne thing. And then another point you made was price doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So how do we understand those two conflicting points?
Okay, so the reason, in a category, in a situation like that, the reason price is the determining factor is because the brands have not distinguished themselves. They're at parity. So the reason I'm glad you raised that, because it's a vitally important point, is like Dell sells computers for £300, Apple sells them for £1,000. So if price was the determining factor, no one would go to Apple. The problem is you get into a price war when there's nothing that distinguishes you from the competition when it's parity. That's what you see. So particularly in FMCG or in the champagne example, no one would know why they should pay more, so they simply won't. But they're willing to pay more, and it's your job to give them that reason.
Thank you very much for the lecture. It was really interesting.
Thanks.
Do you have any tips on how to do market research that will be specific for what each of us want to do?
I think, first of all, it depends on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to sell. You know, there's all kinds of ways. You know, you immediately know about something like a SurveyMonkey, but then there's qualitative research that you might do sitting around a table with your consumers. There's things like ethnographies that you do where you're literally trying to document a day in their life. There's types of research where you'd actually get the consumer to do the work. You might actually get a group of consumers to look at your category, shop the category, document the category, and then get them in a room, say, now what would you do differently? That's another way to do it. So lots of ways to do it. It would depend on what you're trying to get at. My business, I just completed a national study. We did qualitative research, we did ethnographies, and we did quantitative research to validate the concept. And quantitative research was phone surveys. So there's lots of ways. You know, maybe afterwards you can let me know specifically what you're talking about, and I might be able to give you a steer.